Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I have a weekend where I don't have to do anything. I mean, I have to go to like my kids' hockey games and that kind of stuff, but I don't have to go cover a football game or a basketball game. And you know what, Tony? I'm good with it. It's good. I'm happy to have a weekend where it's like, oh, I don't have anywhere to be other than, family stuff. I'll take it. After a long football season, I will take it.
Yeah, family stuff, a weekend at the spa, just focus on you, Tom. You do you. It's a Tom weekend, and we're all here for it. Nobody's here for it. What we are here for right now, some listener questions. We threw out a call on Twitter, as we normally do, for some listener questions. Actually, this time we got some good questions. So this is a nice bonus from what we normally get. But no, actually, a lot of these are repeat questioners, as always. So we do appreciate that. Anytime you guys have questions for us, go ahead and throw them out to us on Twitter or wherever you might meet us. Random road games, home games, Giant Eagle, no Giant Eagles, Kroger, those sorts of places. And we'd be welcome. We welcome all interactions on questions. So, Tom, without further ado, let's get started.
I did just this week. I was at the Kroger in Newark and had someone come up and tell me they enjoyed the podcast. And it was like 9:30 at night, and I was exhausted. And I was probably not as friendly and interactive as I should have been. But but if you do see us, please come say hi. And generally, I'm not totally exhausted, and we'll actually talk to you. So hi. Hello, wonderful listeners everywhere. All right, so let's start with this one from @Buckeye_Berna. What does a dynasty mean in the 12-team playoff era, and what would Ohio State need to do in order to be considered a dynasty? It's harder to win now, in my opinion, so the standards for a dynasty should be lower. Curious to your thoughts. Do they need to win 2 and 4 years, 3 and 5 years? What constitutes a dynasty now, Tony?
I think 2 and 4, 3 and 5 constitutes the old dynasty to me. Like, to expect that in this one, that would also be a dynasty. But man, I don't know that the dynasty parameters change, because you have to win enough to be considered a dynasty, and not just. I'm thinking through this question, and it's like, well, do you get credit for making it to the Final Four? Sure, but not in terms of a dynasty. Like, you've got to win it all. So I don't really think that the parameters on being a dynasty changes. I still think 2 and 4, 3 and 5 years, to me, that is right there with what we're talking about. And I think that is still the case, because can there only be one dynasty at a time? Can there be 2 dynasties going on? I guess, mathematically you could probably have 2 going on. But if you've got like 3 or 4 teams that are always making the Final Four now, I don't know that any of them are dynasties. They're just in a really good stretch. So I don't really think the parameters change in terms of the dynasty, quote unquote, dynasty.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, because it feels like whenever you're talking about a dynasty, it always centers around winning it all. And that's, it is the Big Red Machine, a dynasty in the mid-'70s. They won back-to-back. Or the Oakland A's, before that, they won 3 World Series in a row. Is that a dynasty? And you have to win at least a couple. And I feel like you're probably having that conversation, because of the way college football works. You're kind of having that conversation in like 4-year buckets, more or less, where, if you win 3 and 6 years, that's a dynasty. If you win 2 and 4 years, that's a dynasty. Where I think the Final Four kind of piece of the conversation comes in, if you win 2 in 4 years, let's say, and then you make the Final Four the other 2 years, I look at that differently than you won 2 and 4 years, but you missed the playoff 1 year and you got eliminated in the first round another year. It's kind of a little bit more, it's like the garnish on the championship seasons, where, the championships are the main course of the dynasty. You have to have, the other piece, the side dishes. You have to have the Final Four probably in there. If you win 2 championships in 4 years and make the Final Four the other 2, I think that's a dynasty to me. If you win 3 of 5 and you make the Final Four once and you miss the playoff entirely. Another, that's probably fine. That's probably a dynasty. But it's, there's sort of a sliding scale, and this is all subjective. I don't think there's, you get X number of points for winning the championship, and you get Y number of points for reaching the Final Four, and you get Z number of points for making the playoff entirely. And if the total averages out to 2.4, whatever, like, I don't think there's like a formula like that. But I think if you have multiple championships within a 4-year span, and your other years are, maybe you average out making the Final Four. You make the championship game one year, and you make the quarterfinals another year, and that sort of averages out to a Final Four. Like, yeah, okay, that's probably a dynasty where you're in there and you've won multiple national championships. Georgia is an interesting conversation in the previous version of this, where they won a couple in a row, but then they've missed the playoff a couple of years after that. So does that mean they're a dynasty? Like, maybe, but they, before 2020, they missed the playoff. Or, in 2020, they missed the playoff. They win it in 2021. They win it in 2022, but then they miss it the next two after that. So are they a dynasty? Like, it feels to me like you got to give me a little more, even if you just make the playoff. And, should they have made the playoff in 2023? Yeah, probably, but then they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, and they got left out. And I don't think that it's hard to look at back-to-back championships and say absolutely not a dynasty. But I think they're close. They're kind of right on that fence, and they're probably on the wrong side of that fence. But again, this is all so very subjective.
And yet they are still the standard. I think when you, with the talking heads, Georgia is always going to be up there, at least for the time being. I think you can also be at the top of the leaderboard over a course of 4 or 5 years and absolutely not be a dynasty. Like, that's one thing where you win one national title and you're in the Final Four, even 4 of the next 5 years. That to me is not a dynasty. That's just a hell of a run. That's a good run. And yet, if you look at like Bobby Bowden, those 13 years or whatever where he was top 5, I think they won 1 national title in there. Was that a dynasty? I mean, that's a pretty good chunk of time where they were one of the best programs in the nation for a long, long period of time. But they probably get viewed as that. And in that whole time period, everybody knows how good Florida State was, but you need some titles. And so 2 and 4 years, I think is good. But like you said, what else are you doing in there? And there's probably a way where you can win 2 and 4 years or 2 and 5 years and still not be at the top of the leaderboard in a 4 or 5 year span. So that'll be interesting to watch. You need like a Sears Trophy kind of thing for the college football over the next few years. I don't know, 10 points for a national title and like 6 or 7 points for a Final Four win or whatever, and then see how those turn out over the course of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I'm just looking right now whether the 1990s Atlanta Braves are considered a dynasty, because they won 14 consecutive division titles, but hilariously failed to win the World Series in 13 of those years, which, let me just reiterate, the postseason failure in 13 of 14 years for the Atlanta Braves, which was never not funny. Just to be clear, like we're talking about some very subjective things. That was objectively hilarious watching the Braves fall on their butts in October again and again and again and again. Tony, and again. All right. So, this is something where I think you probably need multiple titles. There were people who are arguing that the Braves in the 90s were a dynasty, but, the first, one of the first results is, despite an ESPN argument to the contraries, the 1990s Atlanta Braves were not just a dynasty, but, it's like, well, but I think there's plenty of argument that they weren't. So
National League dynasty.
What's that?
National League dynasty.
National League East dynasty. Absolutely. I mean, that's listen, you are the king of this small section. Congratulations. Well, you were 20 years ago. Anyway, the Braves almost missed the playoffs last year and were quickly eliminated, as you may be aware. Anyway, Tony, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about this one from at 2007 MLR. What was your favorite road game meal for 2024? I'm just sort of thinking through some of our some of our stops, and we hit some of our favorite places. We went to In-N-Out Burger while we were in Oregon. We got a good Italian beef sandwich in Chicago. That was probably up there. We didn't do a lot of like real fancy anything. Did you have something that really jumped out to you as this was, I can tell you what my most surprising positive meal interaction was, and that would be Altoona style pizza. That was maybe the most surprised I was, but like a favorite meal, it might be the Italian beef sandwich. I got that with the hot peppers in Chicago. We got that in Wrigleyville. I forget what the name of the place was. We just like right down Clark Street from
Big Al's.
Was it
beef?
Big Al? Something like that. Yeah. That was right down Clark Street, I think, or Sheffield from Wrigley. But I don't know. Was there like a clear cut, definite number one meal for you this year?
No, and I even had to go back and look. Like, what were the road trips? I have no idea what we did in Michigan, Michigan State.
Got pizza. That's what we got. Pizza at that on-campus place on that night before the game. It was good. Yeah.
I mean, pizza's pizza.
Yeah.
But the Altoona style pizza was at least different. So I think that kind of sticks up there. There was no like the Minnesota trip a few years ago with the Juicy Lucy, where it's like something that is iconic that you go and do other than the Altoona style pizza. When I was looking at this question, I just was thinking about my complaints about the bowl trip, about the bowls and some of the food there. Like, it's great that you're going to give us prime rib, but if it's just all fat and like, what's the point? Like, when you're trying to find, and this is not just me, this is other people on the beat, like trying to find a piece of meat that actually had meat on it. For one, ain't nothing prime about it, ain't nothing rib about it. I'm just going to say. And then the other thing is when they give us like messy hand foods like ribs or fried chicken games, like, we are all laptops or cameras. I don't need to be all covered in grease or sauce or whatever when I'm also trying to type. So that's just me. That's a complaint that I have about free food. I know everybody loves to hear our complaints about media food, but if you're going to ask us about food, I'm going to answer. And so Altoona style pizza, I look forward to having it again, whenever. I don't know when the next time will be, but also, cut out some of the fat on the prime rib. I understand fat is like a feature and not a bug, but I prefer meat with my meat. That's just me.
Sorry, when you say we are complaining about free food, you're using the royal we there.
Yes.
I'm not complaining personally. I would also throw in, and this is an example of exactly how fancy I am, I will also throw Cookout in there. We hit Cookout both on the way down to Atlanta and on the way back. And Cookout is, again, not fancy, just good, a different mix of stuff. And it's like you can get a full day worth of food and spend, between the two of us, $17, including a walnut milkshake, which is perfect. I am a big fan of Cookout whenever we are traveling through the mid-South. So that might go towards the top of my list. Again, nothing elaborate, nothing fancy, but always delightful. Two related ones, both from Michigan fans, from at MDH2959. You guys should talk about Michigan allegations more often. And from at Andrew HTH, according to Twitter, OSU fans want to talk. All Ohio State fans want to talk about is Michigan, Tony.
Well, we have talked a little bit about Michigan because there's some Michigan news. And these two questions are kind of in line with something that I saw on a Michigan podcast, like 25 seconds into the show, from a credentialed Michigan reporter talking about this whole thing, saying there is no evidence against Michigan of any wrongdoing. And so when that is what you're being told, that there is no evidence of any wrongdoing, Michigan has admitted wrongdoing in their response to the allegations. Like, in their response, they have admitted to some wrongdoing. So the idea that there's no evidence of wrongdoing is ridiculous. And the fact that a lot of Michigan fans are getting their information from people saying there is no wrongdoing kind of points to the whole thing of everything that they've been telling Michigan fans continues to be like contradicted based on what the NCAA has said and done. Now, we're still waiting for any kind of punishment, and this is going to go to the Committee on Infractions, and it's going to go to an appeal after the NCAA hands down some punishment that Michigan feels is otherworldly and overwhelming and outrageous and unfair. But the reason we're talking about this is because it's an ongoing thing and it's a real thing, despite what some people in the Michigan sphere will tell you.
Tony, I'm just going to read you one bullet point from a synopsis of a Michigan podcast, and then we're going to move on. And, Tony, who's to say who is based in reality? Because very clearly, based on the way it's getting reported by one group of college football media folks versus another, it's impossible to say whose opinion or views are grounded in reality and whose are simply a flight of fancy. Tony, here's one bullet point from one Michigan podcast, and then we're going to move on because it's impossible to say who's living in fantasy land. Sharon deleted texts only off his phone because he knew they had imaging. Those were provided the NCAA, and they were completely innocuous. Tony, it's time to move on to the next question.
Wait, Tom, real quick.
I couldn't possibly say who's living in a fantasy land.
I referenced that bullet point on the message board, on the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby and Columbus. And it's yes, I threw all of my bloody clothes from the murder in the dumpster, but that's only because I knew they would be able to pick them back up at the landfill. What? I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just I knew it would be available there at the landfill. I'm just doing that. Come on, what's the big deal?
And when the stated reason for the text being deleted was, I was just very upset at what he had done to the program and these kids. Tony, how else do you express that other than by deleting potentially incriminating text messages? I don't know how you do that. That's how I express my displeasure with everything. And only because I know that data imaging will allow them to later be found. Anyway, next one from @TJ in Seaview. Should the Michigan countdown clock get taken down? Banners are better than gold pants. And here's the thing to me. If you're going to take that down now, then you're essentially, after 4 losses in a row, saying, well, we can no longer measure ourselves in this way. If you want to do that in 2016, when you've won a bunch of games in a row and you've won, at that point, they'd won what? 13 out of 16 or something like that. Sure. Absolutely. You want to do that? You can certainly. Just be prepared for, as soon as you lose one game, everyone to freak out because you're downplaying the rivalry and therefore that's why you're losing. And I don't think this is the time for you to, make a change like that. I do wonder though, they have not made any significant changes to the banners inside the indoor facility in quite a while. And the 2 banners that are up there, in terms of specific games, they have banners for national championships and that kind of stuff. I do wonder, the 2 banners that are up there for specific games are the Alabama Sugar Bowl and the Clemson Sugar Bowl. So the Alabama Sugar Bowl in 2014, right? And then the Clemson Sugar Bowl in 2020. Those are the 2 banners that were up there for here are major wins in Ohio State history. What was fascinating to me about that was they won the national championship after they beat Alabama in 2014. And that one wasn't up there. There was no Ohio State 42, Oregon 20 national championship. There's a banner for 2014 national championship, but there was not one for that. So I thought that was interesting. I think it's going to be fascinating to see, what do they put up there now? Do they put up, because when those went up, that felt to me like this is, these are sort of the schools that Ohio State's measuring themselves against. In 2021, those were kind of the top 2 programs in the country, or among the top 2 to 4 programs in the country. So now, are you going to put up banners for Rose Bowl against Oregon and Cotton Bowl against Texas and national championship game against Notre Dame? Are you going to put up, big individual game banners for those? I think there's certainly an argument for that. But I'm going to be very interested to see, that's the redecoration that I'm looking to see and that I'm interested in this year, more so than the Michigan thing, because I don't think that's going to change.
The banner stuff, I completely understand the Alabama and the Clemson thing. That tells you where their focus was, but also in recruiting, that's who they were recruiting against, Alabama and Clemson. Now they are recruiting a lot against Oregon. So I wouldn't be shocked to see that game featured as somewhere on the walls in the Woody based on what they did in the Rose Bowl against Oregon, because they have lost some battles to Oregon, and they might just want to any way that you can help yourself out against the Ducks and Uncle Phil right now, you're going to try to do that. So yeah, and that kind of goes into the next question. We don't want to get to it just yet, but how much do they value all of these games, and how much do they want to memorialize them? In terms of the countdown clock, no, you keep that going. Yes, banners are better than gold pants, but I would argue, like, why not both? Why not keep focused on all of it? And yeah, it would send the completely wrong message if you got rid of the countdown clock. Now it's like, well, why bother? We cannot beat them, so let's not even talk about it. Kind of like the championship celebration last Sunday, where they literally did not talk about Michigan. When they were looking at highlights, they went from Indiana to Tennessee, basically, and there was nothing happened in between those two games. And you've got to continue to keep some of the focus on Michigan, because that's Ohio State, and vice versa. So yeah, I'm with you, Tom. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, if you wanted to do it, and they certainly didn't because it was working for them, maybe, but not now. No way.
Well, and at that point, everyone was saying, I don't care about the Michigan game. I want to see you win a national championship. And then all it takes is one loss to Michigan, and then everyone cares about the Michigan game again. So yeah, and I will point out that one of the things that changed in 2021, Tony, there was a lot that changed around the Michigan football program in 2021, but one of the things that changed is they put a renewed emphasis on the Ohio State game. And that was when Jim Harbaugh was at Big Ten Media Day saying, you're going to beat Ohio State or die trying. And they put up, what did you do today to beat Ohio State in the weight room at Michigan? Like that became the benchmark there. And that has become a successful thing for them over the last few years. So I don't think going the other direction is probably, the right move there. Next one from Matt Kodeth44. Does the new playoff format take away the importance of the, quote, big bowl games? OSU won the Rose and Cotton Bowls, but weren't really able to celebrate them as they had to prepare for the next game immediately. Now, is that different than when it was the semifinals? I mean, this is kind of how it's been for 10 years now. Ohio State wins the Sugar Bowl in 2014, and they immediately have to go prepare for the national championship. Ohio State wins the Sugar Bowl in 2020, and they immediately have to go prepare for the national championship. This isn't new to me. This is how it's been for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm with you. And like, for instance, in 2017 and 2018, they went to the Rose Bowl and the Cotton Bowl, and I can't remember which year was which. It's like I have to think about which of those years was which. And so to me, I believe it was 2018 was the Rose Bowl and 2017 was the Cotton Bowl. And really, yeah, we all love the Rose Bowl, but they have been diminished, and the importance of them have been taken away since BCS-ish era. Like once there is a national title, the rest of the bowl games lose some of their luster. And it is crazy to think about, Tom, that people used to be happy with winning a bowl game. And this is a successful season. What about these 4 losses? Did you see the Independence Bowl victory? This was a successful season. And now it's yeah, you may win the Rose Bowl or the Cotton Bowl, but you've missed the playoffs. So this was not a successful season. So yeah, when your season is not judged by your bowl games, it's judged by what championships did you win? And if you only won a conference championship, then it's well, okay, that's good. But, the Cotton Bowl doesn't ease the wounds, ease the pain here.
Right. And that's a little bit, the bigger the postseason gets, the more everything outside the postseason loses some of its luster, where when it was 2 teams in the BCS national championship game, then yeah, you won the Rose Bowl, like the 2009 season going into the 2010 Rose Bowl. That was still a thing, that it was only 2 teams that made the national championship game. So you win the Rose Bowl, yeah, everyone's still happy with that. 2018, when it's a 4-team playoff, everyone's a little bit more salty that they didn't make the 4-team playoff. You win the Rose Bowl, it's fine. It's good. People were still happy, but it wasn't, that didn't mean quite as much as it did 10 years earlier. 2021, they beat Utah and in the Rose Bowl, and everyone's kind of like, well, but you didn't beat Michigan, you didn't make the playoff. Now, I mean, now I guess those games are a little bit more consequential because they're at least part of that tournament now. So in that way, they're probably more important than they were. Oh, people cared a heck of a lot more this year that they won the Cotton Bowl than they did when they beat USC in 2017. I mean, that was two helmet teams that were, major, that wasn't Utah. That wasn't even Washington. That was Ohio State and USC. And boy, this is a classic postseason matchup. And it was 24/7. Everyone kind of went, eh, and that was it. This year you had two classic helmet teams playing in the Cotton Bowl, and everyone cared a lot because it was part of the tournament. So as long as it's part of the tournament, then they probably care more than they did before, but not as much as it did before.
Where is the Cotton Bowl trophy? Do we know? I think it's been missing. Like
it was supposed to get shipped. It takes like a month to get there or something. I read something somewhere that it was like it always takes them a while to get it to you. So that's why it wasn't at the national championship celebration. It'll be there. It'll get there when it gets there. Basically, there was another the MacArthur Foundation or something. National championship trophy that hadn't gotten delivered yet as of the celebration. So that stuff will all be in the trophy lobby, sooner rather than later, but it hadn't arrived at the time of the championship celebration in the Horseshoe. Next one from @DMC 200-802. Will Larry Johnson become the de facto DC again with Jim Knowles gone?
I kind of reject the premise unless this is the passive aggressive knock on Larry Johnson getting his way with the front four and things like that. But no, whoever's the DC is going to be the DC, and they'll work with the assistant coaches that they have there. He's never been Ohio State's defensive coordinator, but has been. I remember talking to Ryan Day or Kerry Combs back in the day saying like everybody on the staff is a coordinator. And when you looked at the staff at the time, like they were all very experienced. Like imagine calling Larry Johnson just a position coach. I think he's more than that. But no, he's not going to be the DC and the de facto DC. And even when we've talked about co-DCs, I don't know that we've ever really mentioned his name. We've mentioned Tim Walton or a new hire, but like Larry Johnson's the defensive line coach, and that's where he's been. And again, is this just a passive aggressive? Is this a shot at Larry Johnson more than a legitimate question?
Yeah, I think so, because I don't think there's ever really been the suggestion that Larry Johnson was the de facto DC at any point. So that's how I would read it. And, Larry Johnson is the coaches. Anytime you ask a coach about, how'd you put this together? What was the game plan here? Oh, we all get in a room together and draw ball plays. And it's just like, it's all always described as a collaborative effort. Like ultimately there is a guy who is talking into the microphone on the headset, and that's the guy who's really truly the DC, but everyone sort of has a part in that process. So, I don't think Larry Johnson has ever truly been the de facto DC by any means, but part of that process, sure. Next one from @Brett092. Why doesn't Ryan Day get more credit for putting together the best roster in football? Others spend more on NIL and got less. Ryan is responsible for the culture that brings in elite talent. NIL did not build the team. Ryan did. NIL is just the price of admission. And I think Ryan Day now is getting credit for that. And it's hard. I think it's hard for people to sort of see the forest for the trees where they lose to Oregon in the middle of the season and everyone's ready to jump off the roof. And it's like you lost by 1 on the road against the number 1 team in the country. And it took some weird fluky stuff to happen. And, go back to our post-game show of that game and listen to us talk about the fact that like, fine, like this is not a problem. And even going back to listening to us talk after the Michigan game, like this was still one of the most talented teams in the country. It's just very hard for people to see that because they're mad about losing to Michigan again. They're mad about losing to Oregon again. When you kind of take a step back and look at the big picture, this was always one of the most talented rosters in the country. And of course, Ryan Day deserves credit for putting it together. And, Mark Pantoni deserves credit for putting it together. And all the position coaches and the coordinators deserve credit for putting it together. This is something where this is not just one guy doing it, but Ryan Day, of course, is the head guy, so he probably deserves the most credit. Lord knows he gets the most blame when something goes wrong. So if you're gonna be in that end of things, you should probably get the most credit when something goes right. But in terms of the culture was getting all those guys back at the end of last year, getting Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and Cody Simon and Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock and Donovan Jackson and all those guys, Travion Henderson, Emeka Ibuka, all those guys coming back. That's the culture. That's the cohesion of the team that is, was central to getting all those guys back. And, you keep seeing, and literally the stupidest possible criticism of this is Ohio State bought a national championship. Ohio State did this with a ton of guys who were fourth and sometimes fifth year players in the program. This was not Ohio State bringing in a one-year team of mercenaries to win the national championship. This was Ohio State bringing back a bunch of guys who had already played 3 years there and bringing them back for a fourth, or played 4 years and bringing them back for a fifth. And then you brought in, what did they bring in? 7 transfers last year, and one of them was a center who was fantastic, but then missed the entire postseason. One of them was a tight end who missed like half of the season with a broken arm. One of them was a true freshman quarterback who played extremely sparingly, and I don't think played a snap. Well, he might have played a little bit against Tennessee in the postseason. But, it was like you brought back the core of your team that was like fourth and fifth year players, and then you brought in a Caleb Downs. You brought in, a Seth McLaughlin. You brought in a couple of these key players. You brought in a Quinshad Judkins. But it wasn't like they just brought in this like whole team of mercenaries and it was 25, they didn't do the line change kind of thing that Indiana did. It was the existing core of the team. And then they just sort of added a couple key pieces here and there. So all of that is a testament to Ryan Day, and all of that should be to his credit and to Mark Pantoni's credit and to the assistant coach's credit and to the captain's credit and the team's credit. Like that is what a team is.
It absolutely is. And when you bring in new guys and the original guys, the existing guys, embrace them quickly and get them into the culture as fast as possible, that's another thing. But you're bringing in the right guys, the guys that want to be part of this. And when you're talking about all of these transfers, you didn't mention Keenan Nelson, and people are like, who? I'm like, exactly. So they spent a championship. They went into the transfer portal and bought a championship and spent all this money. It's like, well, they only got so much out of the transfers that they brought in. And the thing is, Julian Sayin and Caleb Downs came to Ohio State. Sure, there's NIL involved, but they came for Ryan Day. Caleb Downs, Ohio State finished second in his recruitment. And once Nick Saban retired, Caleb Downs is thinking, I'd like to go play for Ryan Day. Julian Sayin chooses Alabama because of Nick Saban. Nick Saban retires, and it's like, well, let's see what Ohio State's got going, because I had that connection with Ryan Day. And so, yeah, he gets credit for that. And you're far enough away where, well, yeah, but Urban signed half of this class, half the players. And it's like, no, he hasn't. These are all Ryan Day signees and players. And when you talk about culture, how many, go ahead and knock some wood, but like, you don't hear about players getting in trouble. You don't hear about academic issues, and you haven't for a while. And that also predates Ryan Day. So like, he has continued the culture that is there and made it more and more of a thing. And when you talk to the players who enter this culture from other teams, it's different, and they get in and they become part of it pretty quickly. And that's because they're choosing the right guys. So yeah, NIL did not build a team. Ryan Day, Mark Pantoni, and the assistant coaches did. And I do like that comment. NIL is just the price of admissions. Like, yes, if you come to Ohio State, they'll make it worth your while. But I keep saying, anybody on this team could have gone somewhere else for more money, and I absolutely believe that. And they could still go. Once the spring portal window opens, Ohio State can't pay as much for everybody as they could go get from the open market. So remember that as well.
Sure. And that's something that I think you're seeing in lots of sports, that people are not always going to be taking the highest offer. I think, Tony, as a Cubs fan, you will remember Chris Bryant. You remember where Chris Bryant left the Cubs for?
Was it Colorado or
The
San
Colorado
Diego?
Rockies.
Yes.
Now, did he take the most money? Sure did. How's that working out for you? Not great. And I think you're seeing people recognize, like, hey, if the on-field success, if I like it here and the on-field success is there and the development is there, I don't think that there are, I think there are teams where you have to be the highest bidder in order to get people. I don't know that you need to be the highest bidder if you're at an Ohio State or a Georgia or some of the other programs, Alabama under Nick Saban, certainly, where you can just point to the development and go like, well, I mean, if you're a quarterback, how hard is it to get someone to come play for Ryan Day? Like Ryan Day keeps getting these guys drafted in the first round. So it feels like that's probably not that hard of a sell to get someone to come play quarterback for Ryan Day. And one other note is the people shrieking loudest about Ohio State buying a team or buying a national championship. Google the Those Who Stay NIL fund and just see if someone else might have used the exact same model prior to Ohio State using the NIL to bring back senior players. See if that might have been ground that has been trod before. Bring back a lot of veteran players for one more year and then supplement them through the portal with a few key transfer additions. It turns out Ohio State, not the absolute first people, but Tony, they apparently were the first to buy a championship. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. At RR, and there's a whole bunch of numbers. I'm not reading that. The spring game, who will stand out and shine? Who might get shafted and head to the portal? Tony, let's start with the spring game, question mark?
Yeah. A spring game? When is it? Will it be a spring game? What will it look like? Tom, it is too early for bold predictions for the spring. First, we need to know, what is the spring? What is it going to look like? Who's it going to look like? And when is it going to be? So those are all questions that are yet to come. You better hope one of the quarterbacks shines. I'd say that's a key. You better hope the interior of the defensive line, just throw the entire defensive line, hope that they shine. I think you want to make sure that your offensive tackles, especially those that you got out of the portal, and even the young guys, the second and third year offensive linemen, they shine, like an Ian Moore to create more competition at tackle, and then the guards that have been playing continue to grow. But how much work are they going to get? Like Carson Hinsman, how much work is he going to get? Is this a Josh Padilla spring at center so that Carson Hinsman can get a little bit of a break? Can he afford a break? So these are all questions that have to be figured out. So who will stand out and shine? Tom, my prediction is a quarterback, maybe, but probably maybe not. And also, let's see if any of these young running backs, maybe the freshmen, or certainly I expect James Peoples to do well. But I just wrote about C.J. Donaldson on Friday. Talked to Carlos Loughlin back at the Rose Bowl about him, so I wrote about him. Like, what kind of addition is he? So there's all kinds of stuff to see. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we do know there's going to be plenty to see.
For sure. This is a very different spring than it was last year. Last year was kind of like, oh my goodness, look at all these football players who are extremely good at football. This year is like, I can't wait to see what this looks like, because this could, the spectrum of possible outcomes coming out of the spring is much wider than it was last year. Last year, it was just, is this football team going to be really good, or are they going to be better than that? And you had individual players like Jeremiah Smith that were like, I can't wait to see this dude. This year, I can't wait to see the backup off defensive lineman. Like, you feel like you've got a decent sense for what the first string defensive line is going to look like. All new starters. They lost all 4 starters off the defensive line. You've seen enough that it's like, I know what Edric Houston and Caden McDonald and Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, I know what those guys are going to look like. What are the guys behind them going to look like? That's the stuff that's really intriguing. What is James Peoples going to look like? What's C.J. Donaldson going to look like? What's Mylan Graham going to look like? What's Quincy Porter going to look like? What's Brandon Innes going to look like with a bigger role this year? I mean, it's like a lot of those kind of things. And then, to your point, the tackles, the offensive tackles, they brought in 2 guys through the portal. You got Ian Moore, who's back, who seemed like he was taking on a bigger role towards the end of the season. Lots of that stuff is exciting to watch. So, in terms of like who's going to be terrible and head to the portal, who knows? Like, this is we may not even, this may not be enough of a spring to really have a great sense for that. We'll see who's going to replace Lathan Ransom at safety. Like there's all sorts of stuff that's going to be fascinating to watch. Which of the young corners is going to step up? Bryce West and Aaron Scott, like those guys. How are they going to do? Jermaine Matthews finally going to be a starter instead of just kind of like a air quote starter. All of this stuff is really exciting. So there's going to be a ton to watch. I just, without knowing what the structure is going to be and how much they're going to do and how much is going to be, focused on the ones versus the twos, and is there going to be a spring game? All of this stuff is a little bit up in the air right now, which makes it hard to kind of make a real firm prediction other than, yeah, man, it's going to be really interesting because they're going to have a whole bunch of new faces there this year.
And some of the new face like Devin Sanchez. What can he do there? What can he? At the time, the one thing that we do know, okay, Max Clare, Will Kazmarek, Jelani Thurman, Max LeBlanc, Nate Roberts, Brody Lennon. There is no doubt. Bennett Christian. There is no doubt, Tom. 2025, the year of the tight end. It's destined to be that, and it's been this never been as deep a room as we've seen this year now. Will it still look like this after spring? Who knows? But right now, even if they lost like 6 guys to the portal, Tom, I'm still confident saying this is the year of the tight end.
For sure. That the only certainty heading into spring is we know what year it is. Then we know. Yeah, but there are going to be guys who head to the portal, and we could certainly make some guesses. Not specifically the tight end room, but just on the whole, it fits the same basic profile as it always does in terms of like third year guys who are maybe further down the depth chart than I think they are. But let's let the spring play out and see where things shake out and see who takes a big step forward and who doesn't. And there's plenty of opportunity on this year's team, so we'll have plenty of different position battles to kind of watch and talk through over the course of the spring.
100%. So there you go. The listener questions have been defeated. We do appreciate you guys sending those to us when you do. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up before you go. Subscribe to the channel if you've not yet done so, and hit the bell to be notified when we're dropping videos, going live, all sorts of things. And of course, always find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Would love to see you there. Check us out at the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, where we're talking about stuff like this, other stuff behind the scenes in terms of the Ohio State personnel. There's recruiting talk. There's X's and O's, all kinds of stuff that if you're an Ohio State fan, you'd love to dig into. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.